Welcome back to the Brandon K Show. I am your host, as always, Brandon K, and we're in the middle of dealing with week. Today, we're going to be dealing with trauma, the idea of trauma, how me and my guest have gotten through it in our lives. And my guest here is Brooke,
Hello.
a good friend from Minnesota,
Indeed.
longtime
We're-
friend, 2000,
Yep.
2007.
Is that how long it's been?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of wild that we've been friends since 2007. There aren't many people that have been friends with that long, which I mean is actually related to the trauma.
Right.
Because one of the things with trauma is that it's hard having long lasting friendships because a lot of times people with trauma have unhealthy coping mechanisms and unhealthy attachment styles.
Yes. The only thing I want to say to get the topic started as we talk about trauma here today and how we've gone through it in our lives is that I was part of a trauma group at one point, and we would get together and they would say everyone's trauma is different.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our trauma could be something very severe, somebody and everybody has some form of stress and trauma in their life. Some of it's very severe, and we don't have to get into a judging contest about our trauma, and we don't even want to do that with ourselves, because I feel like some people, even myself in my early life, would be like, oh well, I didn't go through as much as this other person, so that makes my trauma not valid. We all have experiences that have
Mm-hmm.
shaped us, and potentially trauma is something that kind of holds you back in the world, because I don't know how you look at it, but it's like a deep pain. It's a deep psychological pain. I mean, we'd have to get into the definition of trauma to maybe that's something you could explain. Is what would you say the definition of trauma is?
I mean, trauma is something that you have been through that's caused some sort of psychological wound. So we could even say that, back in 2020 with the pandemic, that caused a mass traumatization because it was something that changed everybody's lives and impacted them in one way or another. Um, and I totally agree with that. We can never compare our trauma. We can never compare the things that we have been through, although that is very common for people to be like, well, I didn't have it that bad. Just because you didn't experience the same thing as someone else, it doesn't mean that that thing that or things that have happened to you weren't significant and cause some sort of pain to you and don't impact your day now.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about the importance of why healing is important and how to get through it and stuff like that. But I also wanted to say, like, you can go through a physical trauma. Someone explained it to me once, like, they had an arm that like was in a sling for like 2 years or something, and like they got used to it being in this sling. So once the cast came off, they had kind of like a physical trauma in their arm where it would
Mhm.
affect their arm in a certain way. So like there's also physical trauma, obviously, that's kind of, and then there's emotional trauma.
Yep, absolutely.
So I suppose we're talking about emotional trauma today.
Well, we can talk about either of them. I mean, physical trauma affects us, can affect people as much as emotional trauma has.
And they're closely related when it comes to violent acts and abuse. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so I said we would talk about the how we get through trauma, or let's talk about the why it's important to break through our traumas.
So the way that I look at things is that, or I guess I'll go into like my situation. So when you and I first met, I was a very tumultuous person, had a lot going on in my life, and was drinking heavily in order to kind of numb things,
And I,
and
me as well.
wasn't really aware of why I was doing it other than like, oh, this feels really fun. Where now that I'm sober and kind of taking a more mindful approach to my mental health, I was able to see that there were some pretty deep-seated things that I was trying to avoid dealing with, and drinking heavily was a nice way to escape my body and not feel the things, where now instead I'm trying to feel the things, use the healthy coping mechanisms in order to be a better person and be aware of kind of the things that are popping up with my trauma. So I'm trying to think of like an example that I could use. So a
Well,
lot of, so I have something called CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which basically means that you have lived through a lot of traumatic experiences that happened from childhood up until present. And because of all of that compounded trauma, it really impacts your life. And for me, something that I've found is that it manifested not only in emotional disturbances, but also I did feel it physically, but didn't understand that that's what I was feeling. Like usually around this time of year, I have a lot of emotional flashbacks. So I don't necessarily remember what happened, but the emotions come back. I feel them in my body. I randomly feel really sad, where now I have a set of skills where I can address like, why is this happening, or use coping mechanisms to kind of work through them and release them, instead of before, when these things would come up, I'd be like, I just want to drink them away. I want to smoke and make all of this stuff go away because I don't want to face it. Where now, I'm trying to be more present in my life, be more mindful. And as I am working through all of this, I'm finding that, it's making me a better person because I'm more aware of what I am doing in my life, how I am showing up as a person, and how things that have happened to me in the past are influencing my relationships and basically every aspect of my life.
what was your journey with sobriety? Did it just like hit you one day that you wanted to be sober and like you wanted to make that change, or did you hit a bottom? Or I mean, you don't have to talk about the bottom, but how did it go for you? You choose to want to not numb out with substances.
Well, it was during 2020. Or wait, yeah, it was during 2020. And I was definitely feeling a lot. There was a lot of stuff that was going on in my life. And I found myself just wanting to numb, but I knew that like the next day I would wake up feeling so miserable and that it wasn't the best thing to do. So I decided to stop and try to seek other ways to ease those emotions. So I started going to therapy more. I was journaling, explored different somatic healing exercises, which is basically releasing trauma through movement, or so stuff like dancing, tapping, bilateral stimulation, things like that. Something else to face what I was going through instead of numb with a substance, because I also didn't like the decisions I was making while I wasn't sober, while I was drinking.
Oh Yeah, very common. I mean, that's what we all face the consequences of, the night afterwards or the, bad decisions. Did did You are now a very spiritual person in many ways. Is this kind of when you connected to your spirituality, or had you been connecting to your spirituality before that?
Oh no, it definitely was during 2020 when I had my spiritual awakening. And, it's funny, it all started with TikTok. Um, I was feeling lonely and just created these videos and then was scrolling and found people that were talking about things like shadow work, which is a concept by Carl Jung, where you explore your shadows through journaling or dialogue, basically integrating these shadow aspects that maybe you're uncomfortable with and try to hide. And a lot of people try to hide from those things, like by using substances too. um, but instead of hiding from them, you realize, okay, this is a part of me. I accept this. Do I want to continue doing this thing, this shadow that came up, or do I need to make some sort of change? So that was like the first step in spirituality. And then, I started dabbling with tarot cards, and then started noticing like my psychic abilities had opened up, and it just blossomed into.
This is interesting to me now. So, like, even when you tap into psychic abilities,
Yeah.
you don't feel like you had them before 2020, or they were there but they're just like dormant or something.
Well, so with psychic abilities, everyone has them.
Hmm.
I don't think it's something like, so I don't like referring to psychic abilities as gifts, because everyone has these different abilities. But things that happen to us can block our abilities. So, especially trauma really blocks our abilities. So when we face the difficult things that we have gone through and kind of make peace with them, you'll notice how you gain your intuition back, and you'll start to notice that there are these signs and synchronicities that start happening that remind you that, there's kind of more to life, more to you, than you realized before. But you have to break through that mindset of like, I'm not that powerful. Like,
Sure. Well, it's just all these blocks, and I mean, just
mhm,
for the topic of trauma, like, just to go forth into your life and have a functional life, we got to break through our blocks, it seems.
mhm, yeah.
And then how do we do that? I mean, you mentioned you tapped into the shadow work, so
Mhm.
that is a series of questions about our dark sides of ourselves, and delving into those kind of deep areas and analyzing them. Is that what shadow work is?
Basically, yeah. So you can do this just through journaling. You can do this by yourself, or um, there are people that you can do it with as well. I have kind of done shadow work in the spiritual groups that I have led, or with people one on one, where we just kind of talk about things and process things and learn how they want to like let go of something, or it varies from person to person.
I think that's a good way to heal and connect to other people and work through things, is to
Mhm.
do the shadow work. But you said you could do it by yourself, so, like, is there something you feel in ourselves that we can just like work things out without ever running it by someone else, like, just like we know some deep inner truth within us, and then we're just like getting to it by writing and analyzing? Or
I do think that, we have all of these answers within ourselves, and we have the capacity to heal ourselves. Like, you know, in the spiritual community, you also hear about healers, people that can heal one another. But it's my belief that a healer is really only helping you unlock your own healing abilities. So some people just completely by themselves are able to work through all of these blocks, all of these things that kind of hold them back. But it also is important to have a community. It's not essential. Like, you can do this stuff on your own, but it is helpful to be able to talk to other people about the hard things that you have gone through. Because in the past, we really did have more of a community when we think about like, I don't know, like past lives stuff, like, and long before our, like, hundreds of years ago, there was more of a community where we could rely on other people and go to other people for help, where now it's like so many people keep a lot of stuff inside of them. There is this pressure to just like do it by yourself, but also because there's a lack of trust in other people. So I think it's good to know that you can do it by yourself, but then also I find that a lot of people, once they start doing this work on their own a little bit, then they start to open up and see that they can trust other people or are drawn to certain people in order to continue with that growth and that healing that they need.
Or what about the importance of, like, it's a deep trauma, like something you were abused or something like that. Should someone work through that in themselves, or is that why a professional is helpful?
Well, I think that is something that, there are different perspectives on that. Like, there are people that think that, you don't have to work. So if you have something negative that happened to you when you were a child, you don't have to bring that to the surface necessarily, but then you can. And yes, there are therapists that will help you. Like, even as like a spiritual person, I always recommend, like, you do need a higher level of medical care. You should be seeing, a therapist, because they are trained in different things, but they also have limitations. So it depends on the situation. I can't say that there's like a black and white answer to that. Yes, people should be able to see a therapist or a higher level of care, like when they have a complex situation. Like, I've had a therapist, I go and see a therapist, but I also understand how there is a level of privilege to seeing a therapist. Not everybody has that access. So that's why I think it is good that there are alternatives to therapy. Because so I've made videos about, the mental health field and how I have had these negative experiences that I've gone through and that I want to see a change in the mental health field. And I've heard a lot of experiences from people who have said, yeah, I've been through the same thing and I'm never going to go to a therapist again, which is really sad because I see that there is a lack of trust because of something that happened, and that what may need to happen is them seeing someone else, a different therapist, a different person, because just because you have one bad experience with one therapist doesn't mean they're all like that. And just like spiritual people who are able to help heal childhood stuff.
I got stuck on something else you said. You said that there's a certain people out there, professionals or spiritual people, who say it's to not work through something. And I just would ask, what does that look like for somebody to not work through their trauma? And what, why would, like, how would they do it?
Okay, so what I was referring to is I was listening to someone else who is a EFT, emotional freedom technique, or that would be the tapping, where this specific person was talking about how when they work with clients, they don't make the client relive that thing. So
Mhm.
that's what I meant. But you're still dealing with it, but you're not having to relive that thing that happened, because that can be really hard. That can be uh, re-traumatizing to re-walk through some of the difficult things that we have experienced.
One of the dangers of, you know, we talk about, going to therapy or opening up the wounds and stuff is that it's like some people repress it, and then bringing it
Mhm.
to the surface is like you're experiencing it all over again. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And
so
it can be really scary to have it resurface, and especially when you're trying to handle all of these things in, your regular life, like job and relationships, family, and to try and resurface a really significant trauma. That's why it is good to have a professional, someone who is trained to help you navigate that, instead of necessarily doing it by, or like, instead of doing it by yourself, or yeah, instead of just doing it by yourself.
do you feel like in, your 20s, and do you feel like you lived like you were repressing things? Like you live with things that like you didn't even ever address?
Oh, absolutely. And my did you watch my recent video? I actually talked about this on TikTok,
And
how
I will say that you can find Brooke at Brookedybee on TikTok.
um
Oh,
so
yeah, I assume.
I actually did make a video about this, how I was listening to this mashup on TikTok, and it really unearthed something like a nostalgia in me for my 20s, because in my 20s, while I was reckless and doing things that, I don't align with now, things that I wouldn't do now, I was having so much fun, and I felt so much more free, because there were things that I didn't know. I kind of miss that, not knowing everything.
Mhm.
But now that I know the things that I do, it makes me understand my behavior, which prevents me from repeating behavior that I don't want to do anymore. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of
Okay.
sense. And I would ask that, do you think that the acting out and the drinking and whatever else is connected to that everything was repressed? Like it was like
Mhm.
that's how it comes out, is in that way. I mean, I would say that for myself.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Um, I think about the relationships that I had in my 20s, and how volatile they were and unstable they were, but also how drinking was involved. So then when I would drink, I would say things that I didn't mean, and I was just a very like cruel person too, within reason. Mostly I was a happy drunk, but how there's not a filter. You're not thinking about the things that you're saying and how they hurt other people, or would things that I would text people. Um, but now in my 30s, I've addressed the why I was doing that. What happened in my life that made me react that way? Or you don't even have to necessarily know the reason why you did, uh, like why you had a certain behavior, but instead know that you don't want to do that behavior anymore. Like, I want to have good friendships, so I'm going to learn a better way to communicate with people than attacking them, trying to push them away when I'm hurt because I want them to be hurt. I'm not going to continue that cycle.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I can tie it all together with a phrase I like, which is we don't know. So in my 20s, it was like just not knowing what I didn't know, obviously.
Mhm.
I like this other phrase, sanity is the ability to see the truth.
Mhm.
So I've come into sanity, and like if I'm living, we kind of get into this concept of like being awake, being asleep, and being awake, waking up to things. So like it's like if I'm drinking and being angry at people and just living in this form of however you want to say it, it's like you wake up and then you're like, oh, I don't want to live that way anymore.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so it sounds like, would you agree with that kind of like that you had an awakening of some kind?
Mhm. And another thing that's really common is a grieving process of grieving um, the the person that you were that you didn't really like, um, grieving things that happened to you. There's this cycle that happens once you have an understanding of behaviors or like things that you didn't once know about.
What cycle are you bringing up?
What am I like vaguely referencing or am I currently going
Like,
through?
you mentioned a cycle. Like, did you mean like a process, or did you mean like uh
So it's just something, it's not necessarily a like known thing, like a theory,
yeah,
but so as I was doing the shadow work, I had to, ask these questions of myself, like, why am I ruining these friendships? Why am I pushing these people away? And I had to come to the conclusion that I pushed people away because I was so used to, I had an abandonment wound. So I was so used to people leaving me. So I wanted to hurt them and leave them before they could hurt me. But instead, I had to face that and realize, like, okay, I hurt a lot of people, um, including, some mutual friends that we have or had because they are no longer living. That was something that was really hard on me, is that I had pushed away those friends. And then when those people passed away, I went through a whole different level of grief because I thought about how, because of my own bullshit that I was going through, I pushed them away when I wished that I would have been able to work through my own stuff in order to be there for them.
yeah, I understand. I felt similarly about our mutual friends, but I got to make an amends because I got sober
Mhm.
right before they passed away, and I got to make a kind of an amends in a way. But yeah, it was a hard time to go through losing our friends, and they were a couple, and they both passed away.
Mhm.
But I was gonna say, beyond that, this process of getting through trauma, it seems like you ask yourself a lot of questions. Like,
I do.
that our advice to people is like go and ask yourself a lot of questions.
Yeah. Um, I I think it's really helpful to ask myself why. So when I am in a really negative mindset, I have to stop myself and be like, okay, what's really going on here? Am I actually mad at, this situation where I'm putting my anger, or is there something else that has been triggered that I need to address? And a lot of times it's something else, but it's easier to express your anger on someone who doesn't deserve it, or project that anger where it doesn't belong, instead of addressing, oh, I am triggered, I have this insecurity that's coming up, so now I'm projecting it and hurting someone else.
And that's also what a therapist does too. Like, a good therapist might direct you in the right place, but they also just there to ask you questions and have you come up
Mhm.
with things on your own too.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, would you recommend any specific shadow work books, or any specific lines of questioning to might help people?
I I don't have any books that I could really recommend on shadow work because, like, it sounds so silly, but honestly, a lot of it just came through TikTok, where like somebody would bring up something about shadow work and I would ask a question and I would write it down. I actually have my journal that I started
You remember?
in,
You
in
recommend TikTok then? TikTok.
Yeah,
TikTok.
I mean it's definitely changing. But the funny thing about how my shadow work process kind of came about is that I later realized how divinely guided it was and how um you know, that's just how my life has been, where when I've been at my lowest low, these people come in my life for this short period of time to kind of guide me, and
Mm,
they're a spirit guide in a way.
mm,
Or, people would show up on my TikTok feed that would tell me something that I needed to hear. So
mhm.
that's why now when I have these aha moments, I try to share them and worry less about, how many views I'm getting, but instead knowing that I know it's going to reach who it needs to reach.
Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like when you're putting positivity out in the world, whether it's one person comments or more or whatever. It's like you helped one person, so good for you.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
awesome, and there are people out there on TikTok who helped you, and you're happy they did.
Mhm.
But
And there definitely are shadow work journals. Like, I think trust what you're guided to too. Just you could type it up. The other reason why I don't necessarily push a journal is because I know that there are so many things online. Like if you journal shadow work prompts, you can find them just through, a basic search on a search engine, or you could find things on TikTok, you can find things on Pinterest.
that's what I did. Yeah,
So
I found random questions and answered some random questions, but they didn't necessarily have a name or a brand or anything. But they were helpful to me. Just that's the shadow work I did
Mhm.
as well, and I think you
Yeah.
sent them at one point. But
Yeah, I think I've
it's kind of like
sent you.
didn't have a specific this is this or like yeah it was just the shadow work is kind of out there on the internet on the TikTok kind of just floating around and not necessarily with any structure or specifics, but it's like if you find questions that resonate with you, then answer them and see if they're helpful.
Mhm.
What's some questions that you found helpful? You got your book there.
Well, I know that's what I was trying to
let's
see.
let's see if I can answer it without going too deep into my trauma. What's a good question?
So this is how chaotic like I do things. I wrote the shadow work process on a piece of paper that's ripped.
that's, that's awesome.
So the shadow work process: cry, feel, address, face, forgive. Heal by finding a healthy way to deal with your pain and stopping it from affecting and controlling your life.
You touched on to something though, which is cry. Some of us can't cry at times. We're
Mhm.
too shut down. So
Well, especially men. Men are, there's so much pressure on men to appear a certain way, and like you're not man enough if you show your emotions. Where if a man can't cry, that scares me more. If a man can't show emotions in front of me, that's terrifying, because it's like that tells me that they have suppressed that, when it's healthy to react to things that you have gone through. It is healthy to feel the things, because then that's another aspect of what I do, where when we suppress emotions, it gets stored in your body, and then you can have health problems that result from storing those emotions in your body and
yeah,
not feeling the things.
as a man who struggles with suppressed emotions sometimes, but also having been in therapy a long time and knowing the importance of crying, knowing
Mhm.
or knowing that there's nothing wrong with a man who cries, knowing that there's nothing wrong with a woman that cries, it's a form of healing. But all that stuff, like you could still be suppressed. I could still be suppressed and not be able to cry at times and be like, oh, that's you could feel like, oh, that feels sad. I feel so sad, but I can't get it out anyway, and kind of be in that space.
And that, I'm deciding if I want to talk about that, because this could be like a triggering thing.
No, let's go.
Um,
Trigger warning, people.
so trigger warning for self-harm. So one of the things that I had to work through was, suppressing my emotions. Even though I would cry a lot, um, there were still things that were suppressed, and I found that I had a lot of rage. And so then instead of dealing with healthy ways to get out that rage, that's when I would self-harm through, substances, but also I would self-harm by injury, by doing something to hurt myself, because then I could feel that pain and also take it out on myself instead of dealing with it in a healthy way. So I know that you recently had another podcast episode with somebody about anger, right?
Yeah.
I didn't watch it, but like anger is another thing that I think is so important that people learn healthy ways to express that anger, because something that has been coming up a lot for me is how I have anger about so many things, but I'm having to express that in healthy ways, because in the past I would take it out on myself. I would hurt myself
Right.
because I was also being told, like, these limiting beliefs or projections from other people about how, you're too much, you cry all the time, just go away, deal with your shit. So then by dealing with my shit, I would hurt myself, and that isn't healthy either. So that's why I try to give when I'm working with someone or just talking with someone who is experiencing these things, I try to give them alternative ways to feel these things or deal with when these hard feelings come up, like um, some crisis strategies, for example, would be to hold ice cubes in your hands, because it snaps you out of that mindset.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
It's a way to reset, I believe, your vagus nerve, and that's why
Right.
you also can ice the back of your neck.
That's what we talked about on the show too. The
Okay.
Michelle came on and talked about the vagus nerve and the ice and putting ice water on her face.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, or, it's winter here now, so I
Mm.
could go outside, stand in the snow,
Yeah.
because your ankles are another spot, or stand in a cold river.
Hmm.
But then things that I have to do when I'm out and about and can't access, like I can't go take a cold shower or take my shoes off, I will carry really strong mints or something really sour, because then I engage other sensory techniques to snap myself out of that mindset,
Right.
so that I don't do something unhealthy or harmful.
Yeah.
You could also use aromatherapy. So I would put smells on my wrist. So then, like, I
Yeah.
would be like this all the time at work, which would probably look crazy, but it was the thing that I needed to do to calm myself down.
I do that, and I've also been kind of prone to a little bit of self harm here and there in different ways and abuse, and but like yeah, even like you get angry, you might want to like clench your fist, like you might want to like I would take like a thumbtack and do that, but that's probably too much. That's not good. But like so now I would just like hug myself and like
Mhm.
touch myself
Or
and
the bilateral stimulation, the butterfly hug,
engage
butterfly
like,
tap.
engage with my body and just feel my body because I can get
Mhm.
desensitized and dissociated. So I kind of learned how to instead of like yeah doing something self harmful, just engage with my body and touch myself, which is just
Mhm.
advice I got from therapy and stuff. But it's helpful to me and it sounds weird. But I think it's helped me a lot. So
But it isn't weird, because I think it's really healthy to be in tune with your body and yourself.
it's the
Um,
most helpful thing I is one of the most helpful things I do, and it's just kind of embarrassing, but like I'm saying it so that it could help somebody, because like it's like
yeah.
why not give yourself a hug or touch your skin a little bit and
Mhm.
and not be ashamed about it.
Or the other thing that has helped me so much is put on a song that really makes me feel. You and I used to exchange music like all the time when I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this song is so good." And listen to a really good song, move your body. Like that is another way to snap out of that mindset, but also to be in your body. And the thing about dancing is that you can actually release stored emotions through dance because we have so much that is stored in our hips.
Yeah.
So if we're just doing our own thing in the space that we live in, or even, well, more so in the space that we live in, because it's really helpful to like jump around and like mosh and move your body.
Yes.
It can be common when you have a when you're kind of on edge and you need to release an emotion. It can be common when you're then doing music, dancing, to just break down crying. That emotion finally got released.
Mm.
Or even with yoga, I have done different yoga exercises to kind of stretch, and especially with hips, when you stretch certain things, like you'll notice there is a emotional response that comes up where you'll just start crying. And you don't always have to know like what the memory is, but just know that that emotion is leaving your body, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to go back. Those are a lot of great solutions to the repressed emotions, and it's funny how simple they are. It's just like, oh, just move around and dance and
Mhm.
be free and put some water on yourself and smell something and breathe. Like I love how simple it all is. It's not anything complicated. But I wanted to go back to the connection between like trauma and anger.
Mhm.
So it seems like somebody who faces a trauma, then they just kind of that anger just kind of stays with you. Is that part of the trauma?
Can you explain more? What do you?
So like if you described in your 20s like being an angry person, yelling at people or expressing yourself with anger,
Mhm.
is that like something like how do you get through that anger over time? Is that part of the trauma? Is that part of like releasing the trauma? Like the more you work through the trauma, the less angry you are, right? So there's a connection
Yeah.
between the two.
Because you become at peace with yourself and with the situations that you have gone through. Um, and so that anger dissipates, but that doesn't mean that like it'll never come back. Like lately, I have been very angry and just very short tempered. And I've kind of had to put myself in timeouts because I'm like, okay, hold on. You are slipping into a space where you don't want to be. You need to stop and think about what you're doing before reacting and taking out that anger.
Yeah.
So it's still there. It's still something that we actively have to deal with.
Well, yeah, it's a primary emotion. It's one of our just a feeling that we have. But like, and we brought up the importance of crying and how that's
Mhm.
healing. So like being angry is like natural and like would be healing too to just like be angry and get our anger out some way. Like what are good examples of how to get anger out in healthy ways, maybe?
Um, well, I will mosh in my living room.
Okay, there you go.
You can punch a pillow. So I say, when you're getting anger out, it has to be in a way that isn't going to harm yourself or other people or property. So like you can slam a pillow, you can punch a pillow. Um, there was somebody who actually had a foam sword that they would like
Hmm.
or a baseball bat, and you just hit like a pillow or your bed knowing that you're not going to break it. Like obviously don't do the wood, but something soft that can take it just to release that emotion. Or I do recommend a good scream in your car too. That has helped me.
Writing, do you write it out?
When I am really angry, writing isn't as helpful.
Mm.
Um,
I write it out. I write down. I call it purging. I write down a bunch of crazy crap and
okay.
just get it out in that way, and then you get it all out, and then you just cross it out, rip it up, whatever, and you say this isn't. I don't need to engage with this, but I got it all out on paper. So
Yeah,
I do
no,
that.
that's really good too.
I
For
do that.
me, a lot of times when I'm in that angry mindset, I can't be in that. So that would be, I would have to have some access to like wise mind, where that I would be so emotional, where I just need to, I need some sort of physical release for that anger. But if it works for you, that's amazing.
So I'm just kind of learning about this now, but you bring up wise mind. That's from DBT, right?
Correct.
So you do DBT.
I have in the past, but it's not something that I currently practice.
So, and for the audience, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. You want to do
Mhm.
a brief description of that because it's hard for me to explain.
I mean, it's hard for me to explain too. It's basically a way of rewiring your thoughts. Uh, I could grab my workbook. Um,
What, like, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, you could do like worksheet,
because,
and you write out how you could put numbers on how you felt throughout the day. There's different ways of doing it.
mhm.
That's not the topic today, but yeah, dialectical behavioral therapy. The way I would explain it is wise mind would be like a mind outside of yourself, like to take your emotion and the logical
Mhm.
side of your brain, divide them into two, and then focus on the wise mind over the emotions. Or
Like when I am in my emotional mindset, I'm often dissociated. I'm not connected to logical thinking. Your logical thinking would be your wise mind. And oftentimes, when I would be in the emotional mindset, I would have that like black or white thinking, like nobody loves me. Oh, this person just hates me. That's why they're doing this. Instead of thinking, okay, I am only in control of my own thoughts, feelings, actions. Other people have things that they are going through in their lives. Just because they're not responding to me or responding in the way that I want them to doesn't mean XYZ narrative. Like that is
perfect, perfect.
not a, that's not a health, that's more of the emotions manifesting or things that I have learned over time that are unhealthy ways of thinking. And so I've had to do a lot of work, like, so through DBT I've had to do a lot of work to reframe the way I think things, instead of kind of thinking, the world is against me. It's okay, everyone's going through their own shit. Hurt people. But I have the choice to continue relationships or continue being around people or separate myself.
Yeah, so I like, we can call it mindfulness. I did a whole episode on conscious reprogramming, I called it, and I
Mhm.
threw DBT into the mix. But yeah, just like to have the wise mind, which is like to go above yourself and above how you're feeling in that moment, and analyze it from a higher, wiser perspective.
Mhm. Yeah.
Kind of like that. And
And with shadow work, it's kind of a way of doing the wise mind too, because a lot of times you're asking questions why and thinking more than just like the emotional reasons for things. Like what are the facts of the situation versus what are my emotions making me think?
yeah, that's my major tool in my life, was to learn balanced thoughts
Mhm.
and to break it apart. Like, okay, here's my irrational thought, like everybody hates me,
Mhm.
to come up with a balanced thought, which is more like some people might dislike me some of the time, or some people might not react well to me some of the time. Like a balanced
Mhm.
thought is usually not using all or never statements,
Yes.
and just seeing the reality that not everyone hates you, and if somebody is saying mean stuff to you, like you said, that comes from within them, something they're going through.
Mhm.
So I mean,
Mhm.
if we get into balanced thoughts, it's my other big one, what else can this mean? Which is, okay, does this person hate me and want to hurt me, or are they just going through something and they don't know how to express themselves right now?
Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing too, is that, a lot of people don't have the emotional intelligence in order to express their emotions in a helpful way. So sometimes they do come out in a harmful way or a hurtful way. And, I've learned to just accept that everyone's at a different place in their life. And so there are people that express their anger in ways that hurt me. And, I have the choice to continue relationships with those people or, distance myself. And a lot of times I distance myself from people that can't communicate. My cat's drinking water out of my offering bowl. I'm distracted. Forgot what I was saying.
Can I see the cat? Can I see the cat in the bowl? No, you don't want to do that. Yeah. No, but that cat is very cute. I'm sure. We cats are cute. Cats are a good.
It's a little bowl, and she's dipping her paw in, licking it, and dipping it every single time she does this. Whenever it's full, and it's funny because of who that offering bowl is for.
Well, I would say, how do cats relate to your trauma? Do they help you?
My cats have been very therapeutic. I think that animals are very healing and can help us through a lot of things. I got my first cat when I was going through the darkest, one of the darkest periods of my life. And yeah, they've just helped me a lot. And it's funny how intuitive they are. Like when I am not feeling well, mentally or physically, my one cat, who is normally just like a teenager who wants to do her own thing, she'll want to snuggle. And I'm like, oh, what do you know that I don't know?
We're gonna wrap up here, but I want to end this with a very spiritual question, way off topic.
Okay.
So, do you believe we have a spirit?
Yes.
Does a cat have a spirit?
Absolutely.
Wow. What is it? Are they the same spirit or are they different spirits?
Well, I think that, so I believe in, I have an animistic way of thinking where I think that everything has energy and has life to it. So I think that, a cat spirit and a human spirit can exist and can communicate, like, as a medium, there is the ability to communicate with cats and with dogs, or I've communicated with my plants. So
Sure, yeah. Well, that's like a Native American thing. Everything has a spirit, right? They would say that Native American, like trees and
throughout many cultures, but
right.
Native American.
That's the one I had heard it from. I'm not sure which other ones you might know. I don't know, but yeah, I heard that from Native American.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's why it's important to, have respect for everything, because everything is energy. Everything has energy and a place in this world. That's why I also believe that, when circling this back to what we were talking about, when emotions pop up, when anger pops up, there's a reason for that. Instead of asking it to go away, I think it's important to sit with it and be like, okay, what can I learn from this?
From a situation or a person or from a thing?
Well, from like these feelings, from these things that pop up. Like, okay, so last night in the kitchen, I had a major case of the dropsies and was dropping everything. I was making a mess. And I was getting so irritated that things are dropping. But then I'm like, okay, is this really important for me to have a big reaction to an accident. Like, no. And
Mm-hmm.
it also was a lesson for, and you don't have to go to this extent, but it also was a lesson for me in that moment to think about how far I have come with being at peace in my body. Because in my 20s, a little inconvenience like that would make me want to scream and like make a bigger mess instead of realizing, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
Temporarily like express that anger and then, okay, I'm going to clean it up, and then I move on.
This is something I've said on the show before, but Tony Robbins says it like you could say like, "Oh, I'm so pissed off right now. I'm so stressed right now," or you could say like, "I'm miffed," or I'm like having a bad moment." But like you saying, "I have a case of the dropsies," like I feel like that's a way of just like making it fun and silly, you know?
Yeah. I mean, whatever works for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think we have to do things that feel authentic to ourselves too, and how so much happiness comes from uh, just experiencing life and doing it in a way that feels good to us. And yeah.
I had another question. Well, I want to say I'm very proud of you, Brooke. We've been through a lot. I really am.
Mm-hmm.
The person you've become is amazing, and you're able to help so many. You can find Brooke on Brookedybee at TikTok, where you talk.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like to talk about on there?
Anything and everything. I just sometimes I'll have channeled messages. Sometimes I will react to videos, talk about things that are going on in the world. It just depends. I don't have curated content at all. It's just me speaking.
Okay. So, any final advice for everybody out there on how to deal with their trauma?
I think that, you know, the most important thing is to give yourself grace when it comes to trauma, and know that we're all kind of figuring this stuff out. And we all have difficult things that we are going through, but it's kind of a sign that we're living life, we're interacting with the world and with other people, and that we have the power to change our situation, to change our mindset. But sometimes when we are in a place of like traumatic thinking, we can feel like we're just trapped, like there's nothing bigger. We could feel like powerless, but that's not the case. We have so much more power than, our trauma mind or our emotional mind leads us to believe. So, don't give up and try and connect with other people.
I remember my question too.
Okay.
The first episode of this Brandon K show in January, we talked about acceptance. And it's
Mm-hmm.
come up over and over again in this dealing with week is acceptance. What's your relationship with acceptance?
What can you give me more of a
Do you
concept?
do you do you go out and like I mean when you talked about dropping things like it's kind of like you have to accept it for the reality or like do you have acceptance in your mind as you go throughout the day because like Frank on the depression episode called it like a portal into his higher nature and in his spirituality is like to just accept everything is how he feels the spirituality. And I would say for myself, saying the serenity prayer and working on acceptance of reality and not fighting reality and being upset when things happen. That's kind of what acceptance means to me. Like, do you practice acceptance in your have you found any importance to acceptance?
Yes. So with acceptance, I think it's important to just accept that sometimes things are the way they are, and to know that, we can only control ourselves, our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. And um, peace can come when we accept that about life and about ourselves, and stop worrying so much about other people and I mean, I know it also is a traumatic mindset thing to think that, oh, all these bad things happen to me, where sometimes shit just happens. Like, and you just got to accept it and we move forward. It doesn't, we don't have to place judgment with it. Just accept that, okay, this happened. Now, how am I going to move through? How am I going to move forward?
Yeah, even touch on like when bad things happen in the past, these traumas and everything, deep ones, small ones, addictions, messing our whole lives up from addiction, not yourself, but like all that we did to ourselves in our addiction. Like we have to accept that the past is the past, right? And like it's something that happened, but and we can't change it, but we can work through it in the present.
Yeah, like I accept that there were versions of me that had hurt other people, but the only thing I can do now, instead of ruminating on, oh, I wish that I did this, I wish that I did that, instead of ruminating on that, I have the power to be the person that I want to be, to show up in the ways that I want to show up for other people. And, I live by the motto of causing the least amount of harm to myself and to other people, and accepting that there was a point in my life where I didn't do that. And that's okay. Like, that is part of my story. That is like, we're always going to be the villain in someone's story, anyways, but it's just knowing and accepting that we also have the ability to do different, to be different.
Absolutely. With that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you for joining me, Brooke.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
All right.
Where's my thing?